Hi, I'm Candice Siddle.
I'm Kate Giles.
We are recruitment officers for Adopt London, and in coronavirus times we have come together to deliver the adoption information meeting, information in a different way. This will be available online to you via webinars. We can email it to you, and then we'll send you the presentation and invite you to ask us any questions so that we can help you on your adoption journey.
So we're going to be running through the presentation that we'll also send you. So it would have been a PowerPoint on the big screen had we all been able to meet up together. So we'll tell you when we've changed slides. We'll tell you what's at the top so you can follow along. So we're here today as Adopt London. It's 4 regional hubs within Adopt London covering the 23 of the London boroughs. The government's decided to regionalise the adoption agencies. We've pulled all our resources and our expertise. So we have large teams of support workers with a lot of expertise in therapy and in assessment work. And we've also obviously increased our pool of children, which we're hoping to recruit for. The one thing you need to remember is that Adopt London is a child-focused agency. So although we're talking to you as adults and we'll be assessing you as adults, what we're ultimately doing is thinking of our children and thinking of their needs. We want to recruit families who can help those children and meet those needs. So that's why possibly we'll sometimes be asking you difficult questions or questions you think, what are they talking about? It's because we've always got those children in the forefront of our minds.
What is adoption? Adoption is a life-changing experience for everyone involved, the child, the birth family and the adoptive family, and it permanently breaks the legal link between the child and their birth families.
So moving on to our recruitment needs. As I said earlier, we're a child-focused agency, so our recruitment needs are all based around the children we currently have waiting for families. So we have priorities. We have our older children, and by that we mean ages of 4 and upwards. We have children from Black Caribbean, Black African backgrounds and mixed heritage backgrounds. We have sibling groups. As you can imagine, it's really key to keep those sibling groups together. So children who come in groups of 2, 3, 4, they've got their own bond, they've got their shared background. Really important, if we feel it meets their needs, to keep them together. There's something called early permanence, which we'll talk about in detail later, and that's a really great scheme to be able to adopt babies. It helps them, it benefits them by reducing the number of placements that they may have. And obviously the risks around that for you as adopters can be quite high, but we will go into that in more detail later. And then we have our children with complex health needs, social needs, communication needs, developmental delay, learning difficulties, or actual physical disabilities.
And can I just say that covers 60% of our children. 60% of the children that we are family finding from have complex needs, communication problems, autism, fetal alcohol syndrome. So all things that you'll need to consider during the course of your assessment. Who can adopt? Well, there are only 3 things that legally you are obliged to be able to do in order to adopt. You must be over 21. You must be domiciled in Britain and have a habitual residence here for at least 1 year prior to us starting an adoption assessment with you. And you must not have a criminal record for crimes against children or vulnerable adults. But in addition to that, anyone can adopt. You can be single, you can be married, you can be cohabiting, you can be in a same-sex relationship. You do need to be in good health, both physically and mentally. You will need to be financially secure to enable yourself to support a child throughout their childhood. You're allowed to have pets, absolutely, but they mustn't pose a risk to the child. You need to have sufficient space for that child within your home. And you must be able to provide a nurturing, stable and secure home environment in order for that child to thrive.
What about if some of our families are listing rent rather than actually own their house? Sometimes they worry about that, don't they?
Yeah, no, as long as you can evidence that you're in a secure tenancy, it's absolutely fine. You don't need to own your home.
So we'd like to talk now a little bit about the reasons children come into care. Obviously back in the 60s it was all very different. There was social stigma about being a single parent, so lots of children were relinquished. We very rarely get that anymore. More often than not now the children are actually removed from their homes because we feel that they're at risk, and those reasons are neglect, sort of a chaotic household, so parents unable to budget properly, unable to put the needs of the children first. So when social workers go in, there's no food in the fridge. They get lots of help and support to try and change that, but sometimes for whatever reason they're not able to. Parental substance misuse, domestic violence, parental learning difficulties, some mental health issues in the background, physical abuse, so a child who's possibly been living in a domestically violent household, even if they're not actually being abused, hit themselves, the trauma of living in that and seeing what it does to the abused partner and learning those difficult relationships that might then become their norm, that's really not good. And also emotionally or sexually abuse, we remove children then as well.
Quite often our children have a mixture of all of those things as well, so they do come from quite troubled backgrounds.
And often we hear people say, oh, it's just neglect. Neglect is huge. There's nothing just about neglect. That causes so many things. We have foster carers who say that the children they're looking after are really quiet and compliant, and you know, sometimes you think, oh, that's great, you know, this child isn't damaged at all, but what that potentially means is they've learned not to bother asking or crying or anything like that, because nobody's ever come to them and met their needs in a safe way for them. So neglect is huge, and that's one of the things on the resources list that we'll have sent you that you can start reading up about.
So what's the long-term impact of these life experiences? Well, for them, children, they will have difficulty trusting adults. Majority of them will have developmental delay, communication delay. They will have mental health issues. They have very low self-esteem and lack of confidence. They may develop difficult behaviours, coping mechanisms. They may have difficulty making friends, keeping friends, forming attachments, difficulty at school, difficulty engaging in education. And this not just does young children, these will follow them throughout their life. And it's about engaging in sort of therapeutic parenting techniques in order to boost their confidence, give them coping mechanisms and help them to live, you know, successful, long, happy lives.
One of the words Candice used there was attachment. And again, attachment and trauma is something you need to be starting to read up about. Really key in this. You need to work out how attachment works. In our normal everyday lives, we do it or we don't think about it. But those children are sort of wired now not to be able to do it properly. We have adopters who hopefully we're going to get them to do some videoing as well, so what they would have said to you in these presentations will still be there for you. I have one adopter who always says that it was quite difficult that they didn't immediately get called mummy or daddy, and the children didn't think like that to start with. But as that attachment grows, that can happen, but you mustn't expect something like that. You just need to be safe and building that trust and attachment. So we're on the slide now, openness in adoption. This is really key. Adoption isn't a secret. The children know that they are adopted. You know, your social network will know, the schools will know. They come with a life story book, which is age appropriate, and it'll have photographs in. So it'll start with, this is little Freddie. Little Freddie lives here, and that will be with you, the adopters. But then it'll go on and kind of go backwards in their life. So it'll talk a little bit about when they lived with their birth families and then when they lived with their foster carers. And they will often ask to see that. So we ask that you have it in a place in the house where they can get it easily and they can have a look through it. That will help them understand a little bit about why they're there. It'll help them know that you're supporting them because you're openly looking at it with them, and that's really key again later in life. As Candice said earlier, some of the issues that our children have may not be apparent now, but when they hit puberty, when they're thinking more about their own identities, that will come out. And if you've supported them even from the beginning with their life storybook, they'll know that you're there, they'll know that they can trust you, and hopefully they then won't go off and maybe try and trace their birth families by themselves and get into all sorts of those difficulties later in life. Part of the another way we can be open in adoption is contact. So contact can be either direct face-to-face or via letterbox. Face-to-face contact is reasonably rare with birth parents, but we do advocate it with siblings. So if you have a child who has siblings who are adopted elsewhere, we like you to try and keep in contact with them and maybe meet up, have picnics in the park every so often. Things like that. And letterbox contact is all very confidential. It's all facilitated in the office. So your letter will come into the office. The letterbox team read it and make sure it's appropriate. Make sure you haven't mentioned your street name or the school name or any local activities really close to you that are identifiable. And we also read all the letters from birth family. So we can send it back to them if it's overly emotional. So, social services took you away from me. I always love you. I'll use the rest of my life to fight to get you back. That is exactly what they're feeling, and we're going to support them in those feelings, but that is not appropriate for the child to hear. That will be far too distressing. So we'll sit down and talk them through that as well. And again, when your child reaches 18, they're going to be able to request access to their birth records. And as I was saying earlier, if you've sat down with them when they first came with you and gone through their life storybook, they're going to know that they can come to you, they can say, look, Mum, Dad, I really want to learn more about where I came from, my background, why I was adopted, the real details. Can you help me? Can you support me in accessing records? That's by far the best way of doing it, rather than them kind of running off by themselves to do it.
And of course, if you don't share this information that you're privy to all the way through their lives, when they do have access to their records at the age of 18, they'll see that you've kept these letters from them. They'll see that you've not shared letters from birth mum or grandparents or brothers and sisters, and they'll want to know why, So it's something that we heavily encourage. The next slide is early permanence. So early permanence is like an umbrella term which covers concurrency, fostering for adoption, foster to adopt. It's used to place young babies, newborn babies and young children in a dual approval role where adopters are also approved as foster carers, so that when a child who is at risk comes into care, they can get placed as placed with the adopters as a temporary foster carer while the courts decide what is the best decision for this child. Will this child return to their birth family? Is their birth family able to evidence that they're able to prioritise their needs? Or does the court believe that the best interest for that child is to be adopted, in which case they will then approve the foster carers to become the child's adoptive parents. It's quite tricky to explain, and we have more information that we can provide you in way of booklets. We also have videos of early permanence foster carers and adopters talking about their life experiences, which we can share with you. It's suitable for children who have already had older siblings removed. Quite often their parents have drug or alcohol misuse issues. Quite often their parents may have poor mental health. And the whole idea of early permanency was that it limited the number of moves a child might experience. So quite often, if we go back 10 years, a baby was brought into care. It took us 2 or 3 years to get the court to agree that adoption was in their best interest, and during that period they moved from a number of different foster care placements. Whereas in an early permanent situation, if the child moves in with an adoptive parent duly approved as a foster carer, there's no moves, but it is not right for everybody. There's so much uncertainty around early permanence. Mum and dad might sort their lives out. They might turn around their lives and the court might decide that they are able to prioritise the child's needs, in which case you've potentially had a baby straight from hospital, live with you for 16 weeks, maybe longer, and then you have to return that child to the birth family. You also have to facilitate contact, maybe daily. You have to facilitate meetings with foster caring, supervising social workers. You have to adhere to foster caring regulations. You might have to suddenly leave your jobs or your job because the baby has been born early or suddenly comes into care. You need to consider and discuss with your employers how that's going to work for you. Lots of things to consider, and it's a very demanding role. It's a full-time role looking after a young baby. Do you have relevant childcare experience? Have you looked after babies before? But this is something that we will consider with all adoption assessments, but you can preference that you want to be considered for early permanence.
And if we go back to when we were talking about our recruitment needs, I don't know if you noticed, but the one thing we didn't say was children kind of 0 to 2, 0 to 3. We only really mentioned the older children, and that's because Candy's touched on a little bit there. It does take time when we identify the vulnerable children to get them through the court process so that they are freed to be adopted. And this early permanence scheme helps with that. And it is really the only way to be able to adopt a baby. So it's already time for you to start thinking about the children that you want to adopt. If your heart really is set on a baby, you might need to think about early permanence and the risk that might bring to you, and that you may have to let that baby go. So have a think about the age range and why you really want a baby, and whether early permanence would suit you. Adoption support. A lot of people see this as post-adoption, but actually it's not. It starts now. We will be here to support you throughout your recruitment journey, and then the assessment team is there to support you. But most times when you're talking about adoption support, it's after your adoption order is granted. So we don't go to the judge and, yes, there's your adoption order, that's all fine, goodbye. Your parents now just kind of deal with it. We're always there. Some of our adopters say, they pick up the phone and say, oh, I've just shouted at little Johnny because he did this and this. And our lovely post-adoption social workers will just say, yeah, you will do. That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely normal.
And I do that to my kids too.
Well, this is the thing, when you're in a stressful situation and you're not sure how to react, it's possibly the first time you've done it, you are going to have a gut reaction. Throughout your assessment, you will have been told about various triggers for children. Shouting, raising your voice might be a trigger for a child who's been removed from a domestic violence background. You'll know that, and you'll immediately be able to recognise what you've done. So adoption support will be able to give you therapeutic parenting strategies. They'll be able to give you support across all the different areas of the child. So education, for example. We have lots of education specialists. We have something called the virtual school. We're able to support you in using your pupil premium. So every school has a pot of money for each adopted child. Don't let that school put it into a general fund and kind of use it for a play area that all the children can use. If you're recognising that your child needs that extra support, go to the post-adoption team and they'll be able to say, okay, you've got pupil premium, go and advocate for your child. Tell them that you want that money spent on just your child. And also adopted children and looked after children now have priority status in schools. So when you're looking at schools, primary and secondary, if your local school, you kind of don't feel it's right, it's really large, or it hasn't got that really great Ofsted around the extracurricular activities that your child may need, have a look sort of outside your more local area. And if there's a really good school there, you'll be supported in getting a place. So our post-adoption support team run support groups. So for single adopters, for adopters with younger children, teenage children.
Transracial placements.
There we go. And there's something called the Adoptables for the adopted children themselves, which is brilliant. We held a fun day for some of our families recently, and one girl who I happened to know when I worked in my local authority, so I was there when she was being adopted, and she was lovely and confident and stood up with the support of her Adoptables mentors and recited a poem that she had written all around her adoption journey and her feelings, so they can get a really great deal out of that. I've just mentioned our fun days. We have an annual fun day. We have lots of other socialising events. We send out newsletters, and the team organises training, and they'll help you access therapeutic services workshops on things such as TheraPlay.
If any of you are considering at all adopting from overseas, then we have commissioned the Intercountry Adoption Agency to manage all intercountry adoptions. So whether you're considering adopting a child from Europe or Asia or America, we recommend that you contact them in the first instance. So with intercountry adoption, it's kind of a dual approval process. So you need to be approved as an adopter both in the United Kingdom, but also in the country where you wish to adopt from. And the Intercountry Adoption Agency manage that entire experience. The other thing with intercountry adoption to consider is it's not a free service. Costs range depending which country you want to adopt from. I think that costs will start around £2,800 and go up to anything depending on legal fees and costs and travelling to from that country to £7,000, £8,000, maybe £9,000, again depending on that country. You'll need legal advice both in the United Kingdom but also in the country from which you're adopting. And again, the Intercountry Adoption Agency are able and up to date on providing information on countries all over Europe and the world. So their contact details are on the presentation slide, so get in contact with them.
So when we host these meetings actually to people rather than to a video, very often we say, does anyone have any questions at this stage? And the big question is, what are the next steps? What's the actual process? And how long does it take? So a while ago, the government put in place a 2-stage assessment process, but we actually recognise it's 3 stages. So you're now in pre-stage 1 because we couldn't move anything around. So you're now in pre-stage 1. So that's your learning about adoption. You're thinking about different agencies to go to, all the things we've just been asking you to think about. Attachment, trauma, podcasts, and all those things. So that's happening now. So we're here to support you through that. Once you are prepared and you've got your childcare experience in place, your understanding of adoption issues in place, you will be invited to go through to stage 1. So stage 1 is a 2-month process, and it's very adopter-led. So you'll be working at home on lots of homework. You will be asked to do a chronology of education, of your of where you've been living. You'll be asked to write your life story. You'll get a guidance booklet, so there'll be questions. So if it says, did you have a happy childhood? Please don't write yes or no. There are little sort of mini starting points in the guidance booklet. So we really need you to be open and honest, and that there's nothing that you're going to write that's wrong. We're not here to judge you. We just need to know everything about you.
The social workers will advise you at that stage and give you more information about it at that time.
You'll have an allocated social worker for that, yes. You'll also be asked a little bit more about finances, and you'll be asked for referees. And within that 2-month period, there's a 4-day mandatory training course, and these are run very regularly, and you'll get the dates as soon as possible to help with diarising for you. So after stage 1, you may or may not be invited to stage 2. You can also take a 6-month break, up to 6 months, doesn't have to be 6 months, after stage 1. Some of our adopters say, okay, this might be the last chance we get to go travelling around Australia for 3 months without children. They may say, actually, I'm quite emotionally drained after writing my life story, so I want to take a month off before rushing through and having a social worker come to my house and picking apart the life story and saying, okay, so we can see that you have a brother but you haven't spoken to him for 5 years, but you're fine about that. The social worker is going to ask what happened and what's going on. So more emotional stuff coming out in stage 2. Stage 2 is a 4-month process, and that is right through to going to panel in the hope of being approved as an adopter. Again, you'll have an allocated social worker to help you. In the very first meeting, they'll set out 7 appointments, and those appointments will be at your house. If you set them all out at the beginning, it means that you all know where you are. The process will flow smoothly. Most of the meetings will, if you're a couple, will be with both of you, but the social worker will also ask for a separate appointment. If some of you have birth children, we will also be talking to them separately as well. And we will talk to your pets. There's a pet questionnaire, but you know. So at the end of that stage 2 process is when you come to panel, and panel is a group of people who all have something to do with adoption. So there might be adopters, they might have been adopted, there might be social workers, managers, education specialists, psychologists, anything like that, but with an interest in and an expert knowledge of adoption. Your social worker will never take you to panel if they don't think you'll be approved. So you'll have had those conversations with your social worker as you go through. They will have written a report about you and you get to see it. So you get to say, I remember saying this, but I don't quite think you understood it the way I meant it. So you'll be able to comment on your report and you'll be able to have little changes made. And I think at the bottom also you get to put a little bit about yourself in as well. So your voice is fully heard.
So once you've been approved at panel, and as Kate said, you know, at the beginning of stage 2, we set out all your appointments moving to panel, and at the beginning of stage 2, you should know what date you'll be going to meet the panel. So you kind of think, oh my goodness, yes, in 4 months' time I could be approved and can start looking for my perfect family. So you've been approved by panel, and now is the time to start looking for the child that you want to fit in with your family. This stage is called family finding. For the first 2 months, we like you to exclusively consider the children that we have currently within our agency, because they're the children that we've probably secretly already been planning to match you with. So it might be that when you come out of panel, we'll say, oh, you know, would you consider Johnny or Loretta? And ideally, because of the relationship and the time we've spent with you over the last 6 months, they will be a suitable match for you. But after that initial 2-month period of considering the children within Adopt London, you are then free to consider children across the whole of the United Kingdom. And this is done via an online platform called Linkmaker. So it's a funny thing, doesn't sit well with everybody. You type in the type of child you're looking for, you know, black African boy under the age of 6, and up will pop all the children that meet that criteria. So depending on your criteria that you've entered, you may have 230 children to consider, or if you've been very, very specific indeed, you know, for example, if you were to put, you know, a white British girl under the age of 6 months with no developmental delay, no poor mental health, no history of schizophrenia, no sexualized behaviour, no sexual abuse, no neglect, then you're probably not going to get many children come up at all. So it really depends on the type of children that you will consider. And throughout your assessment process, your social worker will be constantly pushing your boundaries and asking you to consider more and more children. So if you're coming into this process as a couple, you know, one of you may feel not able to consider a child with maybe a speech impediment or a hearing aid, or a child that may be displaying sexualised behaviour, whereas your partner may think, well, actually, I'm really fine with that. So it's really important that you consider the children you would adopt both together, but also separately, and then go away and discuss that with your social worker. And hopefully you'll come up with a kind of a short list or a long list.
And if I can jump in for a minute, when we talk to adopters, a lot of them say, oh no, I can't manage that, I've never had experience of that. We don't expect you to have had experience necessarily of children who've been sexually abused or in a domestic violent background, but with learning and with research and with our support, that might be something you can consider. So don't feel overwhelmed by those things, and don't feel that you can't do it because you never have. That's where the support team comes in.
So back to Linkmaker, you identify a child, or we identify a child for you, and then the child social worker and your supervising social worker get together, they have a conversation about your interest, they exchange PARs, prospective adopters reports, and children's reports. And at that point, they will consider whether they wish to shortlist you as a suitable adopter. If you're shortlisted, at that point, you will get more information about that child, as much information as we have. So everything from their birth family history, the child's history, their medical reports, history about their time in care, how many placements they have, if they're older children, history about their educational, or their time in education, their attainment, how they are fitted in with their peers, the attachments they have made with adults, with other children, but also advice. You'll be able to seek advice from a medical advisor as well about that child's overall development. And then based on that information, you can decide if you want to proceed with your interest in that child. And likewise, the child social worker will decide if they want to proceed with interest as you as the potential adopter. And sometimes there is such a thing as competitive matching. So, and worst case scenario, it's with an adoptive family that you may have already met on the preparation training or somewhere along your journey. It's not impossible, it does happen. So you are then considered for this child alongside other potential adoptive families. And of course, the child social worker will want the child to go to the best possible family. So quite often adopters do experience some rejection, and this can be hard. It's going to be really, really hard. And then you'll have to go back into the family finding kind of process. But you do have your adoption social worker there to support you and guide you on who they think is suitable, what children you should consider, why you shouldn't consider some children, what the terminology sometimes means. Social workers often use language to explain a particular behaviour, and we can help you with that.
And also, one point, you need to be honest. So don't feel that if you see a profile, if you're offered a child, if there's something there that really doesn't sit well with you, talk it through with your social worker. It's not wrong to say no. It's really difficult because it's emotional and it's a child and it's something that you really want as a family.
So once you've identified the child for you, you then go back to panel to be matched with that child. Once panel have approved you as the adoptive parents for that child, the social workers will then start arranging and scheduling introductions. This is the exciting bit. So introductions vary in length, vary in the number of children, vary in what that child's experienced as well. So normally I'd say they were 3 to 10 days, 5 to 10 days. Yeah. And it's a very gradual process. So you work so closely with the foster carers that you become their best friends. You pretty much move into their house over this period of time. You need to bear in mind that this may not be a local foster carer. It may be in Newcastle or Newquay. You will go along, and day one you will potentially turn up for half an hour, meet the family, go away. Next day, come back turn up for an hour, meet the family, stay, have a cup of tea, be introduced to the child, maybe help them with a small task. Day 3, come back, introduce the family, help the child with a task, maybe stay and read them a story, come back the next day, and so on and so forth. So the amount of time you spend with them builds up until you literally are there all day, getting up in the morning, giving them breakfast, taking them to school, being there when they come home from school, if it's a child of school age, you know, helping them with their tea, cooking them the tea, putting them to bed, doing their bedtime reading, until the point where they literally come home with you in your car. And at that point, the foster care sometimes comes with you and is just there as an extra blanket to help that child settle into your home. It's done very much so on a case-by-case basis, so it depends on the child's experience, background, understanding of what's going on, age. So social workers will arrange it with the foster carer and the child based on what's in the best interest of that child. You probably will need to take some time off work. You'll have to cancel anything that's in your diary, and you'll have to be available near to where the foster carer lives. So the child is now living with you, and after 10 weeks, you are able to request from the courts for your adoption order. During this period, you still have your supervising social worker coming and visiting you on a weekly basis, I believe. How are you getting on? How are they settling in? Do you need any advice? Is there anything that we can help you with? Do you just want to talk about, you know, the bedtime routine's not going well? How do I help them settle? You know, they won't sit with my husband. Is there a problem? Am I doing something wrong? So we're there to offer you support and advice all the way through, right the way up until after you receive that adoption order. And at that point, it's for you to then come to us. And you can access adoption support anytime, you know, throughout that whole process. But, you know, also after you got that adoption order.
So that's it really. That's all the information that we wanted to be able to give you. We really advise that you take your time, think about what you've heard today, have a look at the resources and reading list, all those things that you should have picked up on: attachment trauma, learning difficulties, fetal alcohol syndrome, the hidden difficulties like sensory difficulties, autism. Read up on all that and really, really get to know who these children might be. And after this evening, after you've done your reading and your presentation, you need to go back to your regional adoption bit of London, so north, south, east or west. Get in touch and they'll be able to tell you what the next steps are. Obviously, in this time at the moment, the next steps aren't necessarily going to be the same as they would have been, but definitely stay in touch and we'll be able to support you and advise you and tell you what will be happening next.
So thank you for your time in watching this video. Get in contact, start your adoption journey today, but most importantly, stay safe. Stay safe throughout this pandemic, and hopefully we'll get to meet you face to face very soon. From me, goodbye.
Thank you for listening. Bye.